Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a set of sources that cover just 4 years, World War II. But these years performed something like emergency surgery on the United States.
Yeah, it's less about the battles overseas for this discussion, more about how the war just yanked the U.S. out of the Great Depression.
Exactly. Built it into this, global industrial giant we recognize now.
But, and this is key, it also violently sped up all these major social tensions the country had been, well, trying its best to ignore.
That transformation, that's really the heart of our deep dive today.
Right, you've got this central contradiction. The war effort was economic salvation, absolutely. But the sheer demands of it forced this level of federal power nobody had seen before.
And that power immediately shone a spotlight on
Yeah.
and kind of magnified these deep domestic crises. We're talking specifically about racial segregation, inequality.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal here is to show you the incredible speed and scale of this change and explain why the roots of the civil rights movement, the modern American economy, it was all really planted between 41 and 45. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the money and the muscle. The economic shift was stunningly fast.
The Great Depression wasn't ended by the New Deal, not definitively. It was the war spending.
Yeah, our sources show defense spending going up almost tenfold. It's incredible. If you were out of work in 39, chances are by 42, you were either in uniform or like building airplanes.
And what's fascinating is the government's role here. This wasn't just, handing out money. It was total federal coordination.
Right. Converting a whole consumer economy into a war machine, that takes management.
Huge management. President Roosevelt had to create these entirely new, really powerful federal agencies just to handle it.
Agencies with real teeth, too. Like the War Production Board, the WPB. It didn't just suggest things, it supervised the total conversion of civilian industries. Told them what to make.
Exactly. And then you had the Office of War Mobilization kind of acting as the conductor, making sure industry, labor, the military, everyone was on the same page.
We're basically talking about the rapid creation of a centrally planned economy, but designed specifically to win a war.
Which set this profound, lasting precedent for federal power in America, It's something that hadn't really existed on that scale before.
But the actual physical conversion, that's where the story just grabs you. American industrial capacity literally became the weapon that won the war.
Factories just stopped making consumer goods, period.
Think about it. Car plants, right? The symbol of the American consumer dream. Suddenly they're rolling out tanks, aircraft engines, planes.
The sources really bring this scale to life. You look at Boeing becoming famous for the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-29 Super Fortress.
V-bombers.
But maybe the best example of this whole planned mass production idea is Ford's Willow Run plant out in Michigan.
Right, Willow Run. They used the assembly line, Ford Special
To build B-24 bombers. That single factory became the world's largest bomber plant. It was churning them out at record speed.
And that one place employed tens of thousands of people, which brings us straight to the social questions, doesn't it?
It does, because when you flip an entire economy like that overnight, yes, you eliminate unemployment, but you also create this huge labor vacuum. Who's going to fill all those jobs?
Especially with so many men going into the military.
Precisely. So that labor shortage demanded some pretty radical solutions. The government started these massive campaigns, really pushing women to take jobs in heavy industry, jobs that were always seen as men's work.
And right out of that need came one of the war's most enduring symbols, Rosie the Riveter.
Absolutely. That image represented millions of real women stepping onto assembly lines, into shipyards, aircraft factories, munitions plants, proving they could do the work.
Doing the work and doing it well.
And this wasn't just like a temporary fix.
Yeah.
Women's labor during the war fundamentally started to redefine gender roles. It expanded the economic and social possibilities for a whole generation.
These were the women who would raise the baby boomers, right?
Yeah, exactly. They demonstrated capability, necessity in the public sphere. It laid this undeniable groundwork for, future social change. You couldn't really put that genie back in the bottle entirely.
And that visibility wasn't just on the factory floor. Social life changed, too.
That's a good point.
The sources mention the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, the movie A League of Their Own. That was real. It was founded during the war, partly to keep public morale up while the men were away.
And the league itself is just a fascinating little reflection of women's growing public influence and maybe confidence during that time.
So, okay, the economy's roaring, women are entering the workforce in new ways. But let's connect this back to that bigger picture you mentioned, that contradiction.
Right. While the war created opportunity, it simultaneously forced the U.S. to look in the mirror, to confront the hypocrisy of fighting fascism overseas while maintaining strict segregation at home.
Yeah, that's a sharp contrast. African Americans definitely gained opportunities in those defense industries,
Mhm.
but the military itself, still segregated.
About 1 million Black Americans served, but in separate units. Think of the Tuskegee Airmen, highly decorated pilots.
Flew over 1,600 missions. Incredibly distinguished record.
But they were still segregated. Their excellence just amplified that bitter irony, fighting for freedoms abroad that they themselves were denied back home.
So how did that irony play out politically?
It fueled a very specific, very calculated movement, the Double V campaign.
Double V.
Yeah, championed by Black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier and organizations like the NAACP. It stood for victory abroad against the Axis powers and victory at home against racism.
That's a powerful slogan, putting it right out there.
It was brilliant, really, a rhetorical masterstroke that put the federal government in a very awkward position. How could you argue against it while demanding national unity for the war effort?
But was it just hope? Or was it, real political strategy? How did leaders leverage that contradiction, the heroism abroad versus the reality at home?
Oh, it was absolutely a calculated political tool. Activists understood the government needed unity. It needed production. It couldn't afford major disruptions.
Okay, so they had leverage.
They did. And that's why Philip Randolph's threat was so potent. He was a major Black labor leader.
No, he threatened a massive march on Washington in 1941.
Exactly. To protest the fact that Black workers were being shut out of these booming defense industry jobs, Roosevelt absolutely could not risk the public relations nightmare or the potential hit to war production.
So the pressure worked.
It did. Roosevelt acted to preempt the march. He issued Executive Order 8802.
And what did 8802 do?
Crucially, it banned racial discrimination in defense industries contracting with the federal government.
Oh.
And it created the Fair Employment Practices Committee, the FEPC, to investigate complaints.
That sounds...
It was huge. I mean, it was the first major federal action on civil rights since Reconstruction, basically. And importantly, it wasn't necessarily driven by a sudden moral awakening in Washington. It was forced by the threat of political and industrial disruption during a total war. Necessity, again.
And that same demand for labor, it didn't just impact Black workers, did it? It also dramatically changed demographics in the West and Southwest.
Absolutely. It significantly expanded Mexican migration, both for defense jobs and, critically, for agriculture.
Because the farm labor vacuum was also
Immense, which led directly to the Bracero program, starting in 1942. This agreement with Mexico allowed temporary Mexican laborers, braceros, to work in U.S. fields.
Solved an immediate crisis, right?
It did solve the immediate farm labor shortage, but it also became, well, pretty notorious later on for widespread exploitation of those workers. Activists like Ernesto Galarza spent years documenting the abuses.
And beyond agriculture, you also saw people like Sally Gutierrez McQuim, whose story is in the sources.
Mhm.
She represents this larger trend, right? Latinos moving from rural areas to cities like Los Angeles or Detroit for those defense jobs.
Yes, this broader demographic shift, fueled by opportunity, bringing different communities into closer, sometimes tense contact in crowded cities.
And those tensions, sometimes they just boiled over.
Tragically, yes. The Zoot Suit riots in Los Angeles in 1943 are just a devastating proof of that.
What exactly happened there?
You had these violent clashes, primarily between white servicemen, sailors, and soldiers stationed nearby, and young Mexican-American men, many of whom favored this distinct Zoot Suit style of clothing.
The servicemen saw the suits as, what, unpatriotic.
Yeah, unpatriotic, extravagant during wartime rationing. It became a flashpoint for underlying racial prejudice. The riots went on for days, with servicemen attacking Mexican-American youths, often with the passive complicity of the police.
It just shows how thin that veneer of national unity could be, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The moment you stepped away from the shared goal of the factory floor or the battlefield, those deep-seated prejudices were right there.
This pressure cooker environment of war, fear, prejudice, it leads us to probably the most blatant violation of civil liberties during the entire war.
Without a doubt, the internment of Japanese Americans.
Driven almost entirely by wartime hysteria and, let's be frank, racism.
Yes. The mechanism was Executive Order 9066, issued by Roosevelt in early 1942. This order authorized the military to designate areas from which any or all persons may be excluded.
And they applied it almost exclusively to the West Coast.
To the entire West Coast. and it resulted in the forced removal, the relocation, of over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry.
And the crucial part here? About two-thirds of them were Nisei, meaning U.S.-born citizens, American citizens.
Stripped of their rights, forced from their homes, businesses, farms, and sent to remote barbed wire enclosed internment camps in desolate parts of the country.
The economic cost alone was just devastating. Families got maybe days, sometimes only hours, to sell or abandon everything they owned. Homes, businesses, belongings, gone.
Lost, often confiscated or sold for pennies on the dollar. Memoirists like Monica Sohn wrote powerfully about that anguish, the betrayal, losing everything simply because of their ancestry.
So how did the government justify this? How did the legal system, the Constitution, allow it?
Well, that's the critical question, isn't it? The policy was challenged, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court in the case of Korematsu v. United States in 1944.
And the court's decision?
The court, quite alarmingly, upheld the government's actions. They ruled that the internment, the exclusion order, was justified as a martial necessity.
A martial necessity.
Yeah.
To prevent espionage or sabotage, right. Even though there was basically no evidence of widespread disloyalty among Japanese Americans.
Precisely. The sources make it clear that martial necessity was essentially legal cover for racial prejudice and wartime fear. The ruling effectively said that in times of perceived crisis, the government could set aside the constitutional rights of an entire group of citizens based on their race.
A truly chilling precedent.
It was. And the cost wasn't just economic or personal freedom. It was a profound loss of trust in the government by its own citizens. Now, eventually, the injustice was acknowledged.
Much later, though.
Decades later, in 1988, the federal government issued a formal apology and paid $20,000 in reparations to surviving internees or their heirs. But that legal precedent, that idea of swift government, override based on perceived necessity, it stood for a long time.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. We've seen this massive industrial transformation, huge social shifts for women and minorities, intense pressures on civil liberties.
All driven by the war effort.
Right, and underpinning it all was the sheer scale of military mobilization itself. Nearly 15 million Americans served in the armed forces.
Facilitated by the Selective Service Act of 1940, which was actually the first peacetime draft in U.S. history, passed even before Pearl Harbor.
And military service itself, despite the segregation we discussed, acted as a kind of social leveler, didn't it? Bringing people together across class lines, regional lines, maybe in ways they hadn't mixed before.
It did create a shared experience, a sense of unified purpose, even amidst all the internal contradictions. So if we synthesize all this, what's the big takeaway?
What does it all mean?
World War II was this incredible force multiplier. It didn't just win the war and make the U.S. the dominant global power. It fundamentally reshaped the relationship between the American people and their government.
It proved the power of centralized federal action.
Absolutely. It demonstrated the amazing effectiveness, for better or worse, of a mobilized federal government. It ushered in new economic roles for women. It forced critical, albeit limited, advances in civil rights like Executive Order 8802. It set the stage for everything that came after the post-war boom, the Cold War state, the civil rights movement.
It's such a potent picture, isn't it? The war proved that massive federal coordination, massive spending, could literally end a decade-long depression and reshape society in just a few years.
Unprecedented speed and scale.
But it also showed how quickly those national priorities, once they're labeled martial necessity, whether for military security or economic survival, how quickly they can be used to override fundamental constitutional rights, even for citizens born right here.
A stark reminder.
Yeah, that tension between the power of centralized government to solve big problems and the potential cost to individual liberties. That's a lesson from World War II that feels incredibly relevant, still echoing today.